So I played all 6 of the Game Awards 2024 Game of the Year nominees. In this video, I'm going to be talking about and ranking all 6 of them. I personally really loved all these games, so I was super glad to see them all as nominees. I don't think there's a single game out of these 6 that I would give less than an 8 out of 10. We're going to go in order from number 6 all the way to number 1. Also, for a bit of context, I did play all these games on PlayStation 5. All the footage I'm using is from my own gameplay, and there are going to be some minor spoilers for each of the games, so be warned. With that said, let's dive right in. Number 6, Balatro. Now, I really enjoyed playing Balatro. I'm a huge deck builder fan. I have over 100 hours on Slay the Spire, and I have about 20 hours on Inscription on PC, though I've also replayed it on PlayStation 5. Balatro is a very complete game. It's not a huge game, but it's refined. The sound effects when you play a card, the little hovering Joker animations, the replayability with different decks and different stakes, it all comes together for a fun and cohesive experience. It's also just challenging enough. Especially as you go into the higher stakes, the game is really fun to win, especially if you go on an absolute stomp. But one thing I really love about the game is that it's also really fun to lose. I had an insane run going, and I ended up losing because I got super unlucky with the boss blind, but this little sound effects and stuff made it so fun that I ended up saving the clip anyway. I put Balatro at number 6 because while it was great, I just didn't feel the need to come back to it after winning a few times. I personally am more of a Slay the Spire guy, but don't be fooled. It's still easily one of the best games of the year, especially if you don't want to commit a bunch of time to other games on this list. Number 5, Black Myth Wukong. Now, I personally didn't know too much about Chinese mythology going into this game, and I really didn't know what to expect at all, but boy did I have an experience. Purely from an artistic standpoint, I think that Black Myth Wukong hits the nail on so many different aspects. Visually, the game is just absolutely gorgeous. The levels, the backgrounds, they're full of detail, there's secret areas in every major level, and there's tons of side quests. There is a really big variety in the number of enemies and abilities. They all have their own unique animations and interactions. There are definitely some boss reskins, but they're different enough that they don't hurt the overall experience. There are also these unique art scrolls and little music videos that play every time you beat one of the major areas in the game, and I was really impressed with these. They went above and beyond. Each one is done with a distinct animation and music style. There was one in particular that was done with stop motion that I found to be really, really beautiful. Speaking of the music, the use of Chinese folk instruments was great. I've played a lot of games, but the sound profile of this game definitely stuck out to me just because of the different instruments that were used. One of my favorite songs from this was the throat-singing Chinese guy in the start of level 2 who has no head. Honestly, the main thing I didn't like about this game was just how samey the combat felt after a while. The core gameplay is pretty fun, but there just isn't that much variety in the combat. And combat is sort of the only thing you do besides exploration. That being said, there's still a pretty big skill tree, and there's a few ways to approach the game with different skills and different abilities. So it was fresh enough to last me over 60 hours of gameplay, and I did beat the entire game. Black Myth Wukong was an amazing experience, and the fact that it's number 5 really just goes to show how great the rest of the games on this list are. Number 4, Astro Bot. Before playing Astro Bot, my favorite PS5 exclusive game was Astro's Playroom, which is not only free, but is one of the best games on the entire platform. Astro Bot is sort of now the PlayStation mascot game. You ride a PlayStation 5 controller, the little gifts are all PlayStation themed, and there's tons of references to old PlayStation games and characters. Now, I have had every PlayStation console except for the Vita growing up, so I was a huge fan of the nostalgia aspect, but you really don't have to be. Astro Bot, purely as a platformer, is just that good. The developers found a way to inject fun into every single little moment of the game. I'm not just talking about the controller haptics, the nostalgia, or even just the really cute characters. I'm talking about the essence of the game itself. So the game is a really short game compared to all the games on this list besides Balatro. It's the shortest, and I was actually able to platinum the game in under 16 hours. Because the game was short, it really let the developers focus on the fun aspect. So every single screen and every single level is crafted with a really, really close attention to detail. And there are a lot of levels. The core mechanics are so simple. The movement is super fluid in the animations, the enemies are super lively, and the little character animations that Astro has really, really bring the game to life in a way that no other game since Astro's Playroom really has for me. Another huge plus is that the game runs super smoothly on PS5. I think one of the great things that make this game work is just how short the loading screens are. It just doesn't really feel bad to get hit and have to go back to the last checkpoint because it happens so fast. Now, I'm showing some footage on screen of the game, and I'm sure the footage looks quite fun, but I feel like the footage doesn't do this game justice. There's a very unique feeling that happens when you shoot shurikens or do a spinny attack because of the controller haptics, and it's just fun to just simply hold the controller and punch and do spins. And I haven't had that kind of experience from a game in a really long time, so this was super appreciated from me. If you love platformers and own a PS5, do yourself a favor and buy this game. Number 3, Metaphor Refantazio. Alright, now we're in top 3 territory. You could probably tell that I'm a JRPG enjoyer from the last 3 games in this list. So on top of the visual style and the soundtrack, which are beautiful, it really makes some nice changes to the Atlas formula. So the battle system has the concept of turn icons, which are a little switch up from the Persona formula, but I think they really change how the game fundamentally plays. Normally in a Persona game, when you hit an enemy for a weakness, they get knocked down. But in Metaphor, they change it up so that you actually take half a turn when you hit a weakness. And there's also synthesis attacks, which take up 2 character turns instead of 1, but they're very, very powerful. I think this kind of works in a way where it makes the combat more calculated, and it's a little bit more fun to do the planning. I also really enjoyed the overworld battle system, which lets you fight and grind EXP without needing to go into full-fledged turn-based battles, which I think was really great for just appreciating the player's time. What I really like the most about this game, though, and Atlas games in general, is that it actually takes itself fairly seriously. You know, Persona games always have a weird scene where the main characters are peeping on the women in the bathroom, and it's kind of weird, but this game doesn't really have anything like that. In fact, it pretty much has no romance at all. And I think that the message of the story is good. It does a really good job of getting it across. I don't think it's a simple story about just ending racism. I think it's also about living to your ideals and values, and I think that's a good message. The combat system is fairly deep. There's lots of classes and ways to approach battles. There are a number of characters. It blends the daytime social simulation and the core combat quite well. And I also really appreciate that there's a lot more room for error than in the Persona games, where if you kind of aren't playing optimally, you can miss out a lot of stuff. In Metaphor, I ended up having around 10 extra days, so I was able to play this game completely without a guide. But yeah, overall, I really, really had a blast traveling through Uchronia and the Gauntlet Runner, making friends in Metaphor, and just enjoying the game. Number 2, Shadow of the Erdtree. Shadow of the Erdtree is amazing. I don't necessarily think that it should be called a game of the year because it's a DLC, but for what it's worth, it's longer than some of the other games on this list. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm not a massive From Software fan. One thing I think doesn't get talked about enough in Shadow of the Erdtree is how there's always something new. So when you first look at the map, you really have no idea how big the DLC is. And even when you find the full map, it really doesn't tell the full story of how large the map is, because there are areas that are underground, and then many of the levels have a lot of verticality, so they're kind of stacked on top of each other, which isn't really shown on the map. There are full-on hours of gameplay hidden behind illusory walls and just deep, dark caverns. And the game really, really, really rewards curiosity and puts you into situations where you have to experiment with all the tools you're given. I also feel like because it's a DLC, the developer team really had time to think about and make the experience feel complete. There aren't really like random dungeons and kind of wasteful areas in the game. Every nook and cranny, every little dungeon, every area has intention behind it. Everything feels deliberately placed there. This DLC was, everything that From Software is known for, dialed up to 11. I love the new weapons, the new build options, the new areas, the bosses, the enemies, the levels, the wonder, the mystique, the dialogue, and just the sheer epicness of everything. The only thing keeping this from being number one is that I felt like it didn't really innovate on the experience, and I also felt the story was a little incoherent, even by From Software standards. And my number one game of the year is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now I know what you're thinking. How could this be better than everything before it? Well, let me tell you, in my opinion, this game is a masterpiece. I have been a JRPG fan for a long time, and I have really been waiting for a game like this. I already loved Final Fantasy VII Remake, so when I heard that Rebirth was going to be open world, I was honestly a little bit skeptical. I couldn't imagine how the first game would kind of work as an open world game because it was linear, and even the DLC intermission was quite linear. Having finished the game around February this year and kind of replaying parts of it recently, I can pretty confidently say that the game lived up to the hype for me and even surpassed it. From the moment I stepped into the game, I was constantly being blown away. The first thing that really stuck out to me was just looking up at the sky. I've been playing games for a long time, but looking up in the sky in the first area, the grasslands, was really, really a sight to behold. The sky, the little enemy animations as they walk around, the wind rustling through the chocobo's feathers, the grass breezing left and right, all of it, just the fine details, really, really, really make it a beautiful game. And to me, visuals don't even matter that much, and I think it's important to say that because that's just how much this game blew me away. And that's just the environments. I'm not even mentioning the facial expressions, the enemy designs, and all the animations, which are all top notch. Now, what really sets the game apart, though, is the core gameplay. You can tell from number 2 and number 3 on this list that I enjoy both turn-based combat and real-time action RPG combat. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the perfect blend of the two. While Remake had already figured out the combat system to make it incredibly fun, Rebirth really elevates those concepts to the next level. The combat system is really deep, it's really varied. There are a lot of ways to pick a party of 3 characters because there's a lot of ways to arrange your materia, to customize your abilities. On top of that, you have your limit attacks and your synergy attacks. Putting it all together, you get a combat system that really rewards both planning and execution. I really can't emphasize enough how fun it is to go into these battles. There's just so many abilities that you have access to across all 3 characters, and it really makes it so that each encounter, especially the boss encounters, can play out completely differently depending on who you go with. The sound effects and the music combined with the particle effects and smooth animations elevate the battles to another level. Obviously, also outside of the core combat, there's plenty to do. It's really fun to just walk around and play all the mini games you have access to, hear the little goofy side quests, and just explore the world and take a bunch of pictures in the photo mode. I think it keeps the game fresh because there's just always something else to do if you get bored of one thing. And I know I did that a lot. I played a lot of the Queen's Blood card game. And if you take everything I said before and top it all off with the nostalgia factor, that pushes Final Fantasy VII Rebirth above every other game this year into absolute legendary status. Now, if you don't like the core combat or minigames, I don't think you're going to enjoy this game as much as I did, but I really do hope you give it a try, especially if you're a fan of the action combat. But yeah, that's all for the video. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.